Coffee of the year. Glad to see so many of you here. Actually, it's more than we expected for the first ones. Must be a lot going on at the Capitol, or a lot will be going on at the Capitol. We do have Senator Tyson with us this morning. Glad to see you. And Representative Finch. Glad to see you. I don't know if Kevin's going to make it or not, but if he does, we'll find a spot for him and go from there. A few announcements before we get started. We want to thank the Ottawa Area Chamber of Commerce Legislative Action Committee, which is putting this on. Franklin County Farm Bureau, American Legion Post 60, Walmart's Logistics, Hasty Awards, and Advantage Ford, and American Legion Post 60 is providing the donuts. The city is providing the coffee, the facilities, and this is, I believe, going live on Channel 20, so we thank the city for that. On another note, a little sad note, those of you that know Bill Fiburn, ex-Representative Bill Fiburn, his sister passed away, and I believe she was a teacher here in the Ottawa School District, as well as the Garnett School District. So as we get started here, we'll give Senator Tyson and Representative Finch an opportunity to weigh in. I did bring the newspapers, not much happening in Topeka right now. We had the governor's inauguration, I believe, on Monday, and then the address later in the week. Some things that I just noticed, Kobach, Secretary of State, he's talking about straight line voting and some other election rules. And then this morning in the paper, plan includes tax increases. It seems like those of you that like to smoke and drink, it's going to cost you. I don't know. Do you smoke and drink? He quit. And then Friday's paper, they talked about the bond rating, court changes, how Supreme Court justices are selected, wanting to do similar to what they do in Washington. No new taxes, with the exception of alcohol and tobacco. So those are just some of the things. And I think Senator Haley wants to legalize marijuana for medical purposes. So it looks like everybody has something that they want to do. So we'll start off this morning. We'll ask Senator Tyson and Representative Finch to. I'm going to give them 5 minutes to start. I said they'll probably take 10, but that's okay.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to see such a good crowd. I know we have great weather today. I am sorry to hear Representative Fiburn lost a family member. Our thoughts and prayers will be with him. I'd like to thank our sponsors this morning for putting this together. I know that's not an easy endeavor. It takes some effort to do that. You know, and also just to let you know, Representative Jones had a conflict this morning, and he is going to try to be here before we finish this morning. So, it's the first week of session, so it's very early in the session, and it's hard to tell at this point what direction the legislature is going to take on any issue at this point. But we have heard rumblings, and most of you heard the State of the State, what was in it. And then Friday, the governor presented his budget to the Ways and Means and Appropriations Committees, which was interesting because it was about a 5,000-foot view of the budget. It wasn't really in the details. And that's what we need to do over the course of the next couple weeks, is to dig into the details and see what was actually in those proposed budgets. Tax is definitely on the table. I ran on lower taxes. I support lower taxes. I feel like we actually have a spending problem in the state of Kansas. For those of you that don't know, revenues or receipts, taxes collected last 2015 were up 2%, approximately 2%, are anticipated to be 2% over 2014. So that's actually bringing in more money. The problem is the spending went up over 6%. Well, when you're increasing greater than the amount you're taking in, obviously you've got a gap, a large gap. And so we've got to figure out how to address that. I know one of the items that the governor proposed was decreasing the stair steps that are supposed to kick in on the tax cuts, the income tax cuts. I have a feeling the legislature is going to be a little bit more aggressive on those and probably remove them completely. Now, and I shouldn't say the legislature, because that so far is what I'm hearing rumblings in the Senate position, and I'll let Representative Finch address the House position on that. But so that's kind of what we're looking at, is bringing that gap in together and just getting things under control. I ran on, smaller government. We have government intruding on all aspects of our life now. And that's not what this country's about. That's not what this state is about. We're about our freedoms. And so we need to address the wasteful spending in the state. And you and I both know that there's items out there that can be looked at. And it may not seem like a large amount of money, but if we get a little bit here and a little bit there, those amounts start to add up fairly quickly. So that's what we need to do as legislators. We need to dig in and do our job that you elected us to. Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you all for coming out this morning, and I also want to extend condolences to Representative Fireburn on the loss of his sister. As I sit here and can see the name tag of City Attorney Robert Bezick, I want to extend condolences to him on the loss of his father, who passed away on Friday, and we certainly will keep those folks in our thoughts and prayers as time goes on. I think the senator's correct that we're all kind of dealing with the, say, fallout, and don't mean that in a negative connotation, but the fallout of the Thursday night State of the State speech and then Friday morning's 5,000-foot view of the budget. We still haven't quite got all the nitty-gritty details out there to know whose ox will be gored the most, and that's always a question in politics, right? Whose ox is getting gored? Let alone the unpacking of what's being proposed with school finance, which is significant and something that should be of concern to all Kansans as we talk about education and how it will continue to be funded in the future. So we have some really big things that have happened within the last 36 hours or so that we still haven't had time to unpack, and that's not an excuse to not talk about them this morning. I'll be happy to talk about it. I know the senator will too, but understand that even for us on the inside, our knowledge is somewhat limited because we haven't been provided all the detail yet and had time to sift through what comes out as essentially two documents so large that they break them into two PDF electronic documents because you can't put them all in one file size and still hope to get it through anybody's email server. So, there's a lot to go through, and the folks on the second floor in the governor's office have had several months head start on the good senator and I in terms of reviewing that stuff and coming to a conclusion on what we like and what we don't. But we will do our best to fill you in as we see fit and capable. The other thing, as the senator said, we talk about a spending problem in Topeka, and it's always a balance, right? How much do we require in taxes, and what services are delivered on the other hand, and how do we get the best bang for our buck? My quick impression of the governor's budget is that we don't see a lot of change in spending habits. The state all funds budget will continue to be over $15 billion proposed over the next several years, and it will continue to grow. The 4% spending cuts that were required by the governor's allocations in December will remain and be permanent, but that's really it in the way of large-scale spending cuts to state departments that are not K through 12 education. So the notion that we were going to cut taxes and then cut spending on the government side really has never materialized in the state of Kansas, and based on the 2-year budget that's being proposed, we still don't see that happening to any significant degree. There are some, and so that's the sun shining bright. There are other stars in the sky, and in the daytime you can't see them, but there are a lot of other moving pieces going on in state government right now, and I hope we get the chance to talk about those on our various committees and the things that are going on. But there are some good sound government ideas that will help reduce the burden on taxpayers, that will make us smarter in terms of how we deal with social problems and things that are going on. And so I look forward to hopefully unpacking some of those this morning through your questions as we talk about them. And we've got a full house here. I see people across the age spectrum, and it should be a fun time to visit with all of you about the things that are on your minds.
You might tell us what committees you serve on.
I serve on utilities, telecom and utilities, and then serve on corrections and juvenile justice, and then finish my day most days with judiciary in the afternoon.
Well, that's kind of interesting. The last time I was in Ottawa and spoke publicly, I had given the committees that I was on, and I said that a few of the Senate committees were going to be changing. However, I didn't think mine were going to change. I had received a phone call from the Senate president at that time asking me to be on Ways and Means, and I was reluctant. Just as a freshman, I thought that was a little aggressive. It's one of the, it's a very important committee. However, she made another phone call, and I figured you can't turn her down for the second time. So my committee assignments did change. I am on Ways and Means. I was on tax, and we did cut taxes in the state of Kansas. And as the representative said, we did not cut spending. And so they've asked me to be on the spending portion in order to look at it, to figure out where we need to be. And they know that I do the hard study and try to find the wasteful spending. So they have asked me to be on that committee. Although I am just one person on the committee, I will do my best to represent the 12th district, and I'm anxious to hear from you guys, any ideas and what your thoughts are. Also, I am on the Ag and Natural Resource Committee in the Senate, and Education. So I've got a full load, and then I've got 3 other subcommittees. So it will be a busy session for me this year. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we're ready for questions. Got plenty of folks here, so we ought to have plenty of questions. I'd ask you to ask one question at a time. Keep it brief. Try to stay away from editorializing. Want to give everybody an opportunity to ask the question they might have before we come around the second time. I guess I'm going to cover this side. Gene's going to run with the mic. He's younger than I am, so. All right, who has the first question?
Please state your name and address before you speak, please.
Jack Ray says nobody knows me, but I am Joyce Wasman, and I now am a resident of Ottawa for all you people that are representing Ottawa. First time I've been out of Ohio Township for 70 years, and I am that old. But I am still going to be nagging you all session about keeping the liquor stores as liquor stores, and please do not vote to put liquor in the grocery stores. If you want to ask me sometime while I'm so adamant about it, I'll tell you, but I don't want to broadcast it. So that's my concern. And Blaine, I want to tell you once more, like I tell you every time I see you, I'm so proud of you. I watched him grow up.
Richard, why don't we have a hold of hands, how many feel the same way that Joyce does? How many feel that way? So these people can know that.
We're doing an unscientific poll here, huh? Okay.
I appreciate that.
Who's next? Okay.
I noticed we had a liquor store owner with his hand up, too. I'm not sure what that...
Okay. Come on, not all at once. He's closer.
Well, can I comment on that just a real quick minute? Of that bill is actually going to come up in the House first. So our representatives have their work cut out for them on that. And I do agree with you. I campaigned on that, actually. So I will continue that thought, is that the liquor stores have followed a set of rules that the grocery stores and convenience stores want to change those rules. And so we would put the small businesses out. So thank you for your question.
Yeah, the bill has not gotten out of committee in the House ever. I don't know if this year will change that or not. They are continuing their push. We hope it doesn't come out of committee. I wrote an update piece last session about that and about my position on it, which matches your own, Joyce. And in politics, there are always consequences. All the grocery stores then gave money to my opponent in the campaign. So Dillon's and Hy-Vee have a lot of money behind that effort. They really want to see that happen. I've always said there's a number of reasons why I feel that way, not the least of which is the economics of the fact that liquor store owners tend to spend money locally with insurance agents and contractors and To take that away and provide that to Walmart or Dillon's or Hy-Vee hurts our local economy, in addition to making alcohol more available to young people. I've worked in convenience stores growing up, and I know that you'd come in the morning to do the inventory and find that some of the alcohol had disappeared overnight because the night shift clerk had some friends who would come by and help themselves. So we certainly don't want to increase that access to alcohol for young people by putting it in grocery stores where controls may not be as strict as they are at liquor stores. So I think we have a unanimous ballot up here on keeping liquor stores selling liquor and not in grocery stores.
Daryl McCune from Ottawa. I have a concern about what the governor was saying about the doing something with the school finance formula. As a school teacher, I know how important that is for our schools to keep equitable funding throughout the state. In 1992, when they passed that, it really helped equalize a lot of the discrepancies between the school districts. And if you notice through the years, the local option budget has become more and more of a way for school districts to get funding. It started out as being able to do it just with, to get extra things, and now schools are relying more and more on the local option budget to keep their spending levels up to where to provide enough basic services for kids. So I would like to know what you would do in terms of what your feelings are about messing with the formula, and particularly with the local option budget.
I can or you can,
By
doesn't
either
matter.
one. We're probably
We'll
gonna
switch
agree.
off. So I have some serious questions about the governor's proposal on education finance. The notion that we're going to change the formula, take the money that was formerly in the formula, which, complex as it is grown up to serve certain needs. We have weightings for students who essentially take more school resources. If a student is special ed, if they are low income and coming in from a family environment where they're not provided those supports at home, it takes more to get that student up to speed with his or her peers. And so we've weighted those students. We provide more money for those things. And when the governor made his comment about the school population appears to have grown even though students have remained steady in terms of their number, he's taking a jab at those weightings. But there's a reason those weightings are there, because it takes more resources to educate certain children than others, and we've acknowledged that. To go to block grants and to just disseminate that money, and it's a question of whether those students will be served at the same level. There's questions within that about, there's a $44 million cut in what's called state aid to schools that's designed to cover capers. And so we're basically going to ask locals to pick up that $44 million. So you're talking about a further tax burden, a property tax burden on all of us sitting in this room and across the state to cover those things. You have questions about bonded indebtedness. They say it's going to continue, but USD 290 is looking at a bond issue perhaps in April of this year, and they're relying on the fact that the state will match 42% of that, and that's a question of whether or not they can or will in the future. So it's something we've got to be mindful of. And hanging over all of that is whether that still meets the constitutional adequacy test in the Gannon case, which I think the theory is if we get away from having a number called base aid per pupil and just give money, that then there's no longer a constitutional test of sufficiency, and that's simply not the case. Legally, you still have to make suitable provision for public education in Kansas. That's a constitutional mandate under Article 6 of the state constitution, and I'm skeptical that putting less dollars in under a different name will really confuse the court to the point that they don't understand that's what's being done. So we can certainly have a conversation about efficiency in education and spending and levels and all of that, but what this does is to essentially force school districts to negotiate at the end of a gun, because once the block grants are in place and there is no secured formula, at the end of 2 years, the legislature could go anywhere with that. Up, down, who knows? And that sort of insecurity for school districts and for those who educate our children is not going to be favorable and certainly not going to lead to a fair negotiation about what we ought to support as Kansans for public education. And really, that ought to be the starting point. If we want to change the formula, let's have that discussion and change the formula. And I think it's unfortunate that there are those that say, well, we can't have that discussion. It's too politically volatile. It's too, there's too much potential for conflict. That's the system. And if that's the conversation we want to have, let's have that conversation. And if it takes 2 years, so be it. I don't see the value in changing off of the current formula while we converse about what the new formula will look like.
You know, it was interesting on the State of the State when the governor did mention that. The room did not applaud. It was almost silent. So and you can kind of get a feel somewhat of where the legislature is leaning on some of these issues. Now, it may change during the session, but I have a feeling the block grant's not going anywhere. I don't. What is interesting was in 2014, the education budget was approximately $4.3 billion. Now, this includes K through 12 and higher ed. And then in 2015 budget, it was $4.5 billion, $4.52 billion approximately. And the governor proposed a block grant of $4.54 billion. Now, it didn't have any details in it as to how this money would be distributed, where, who would get what. So we've got to step back and say, I agree. We need to have the conversation on funding for education. That is probably long overdue. Equalization is a big issue that you brought up. When Johnson County gets an increase in school funding as a result of the equalization formula, there's a problem with the equations. So it's been stated, I've heard it said, and I absolutely think there's some truth to it, is that there's 2 people in the state of Kansas that understand the school funding formula. That's Dale Dennis, and there's got to be one other person out there. So, it's just a complicated formula. So we do need to address that, and we need to take care of our rural schools. I'll just go ahead and bring it up. You guys haven't asked about it yet, but one of the first questions that was asked yesterday after the governor's budget proposal was, why aren't we raising property taxes on agriculture in rural Kansas? That would address the school funding issue. So, I've said it before, the argument isn't going to be against party lines. It's more going to be against demographics and where we live in the conversation for school funding. But we do need to take care of our rural schools. They're talking forced consolidation. I don't agree with that, and I know all of you. That is one thing that will it'll shut a town down for them to lose their school. So we need to be wise moving forward and do our due diligence. And this will not happen overnight, and it may take more than one session to get it fixed, but we need to get it right, and we need to address the problem.
If I may, just one follow-up. You asked specifically about LOB, and it's unclear yet in that block grant if we are what they call nationalizing the LOB, that is making it part of state aid to local districts, or whether we're leaving LOBs in place for local districts who have them. And the LOB is somewhat confusing. As you indicated, it started out as a way for a district to say, we get X number of dollars, we'd like to add a science lab, or we'd like to enrich our music program, so we want to spend a little extra, and they put that up to the voters if they can have extra authority to do that. Back when the state, when I call it the state mill levy, when the mill levy was allowed, that we were taking about 35 mills in property tax to fund public education, and through the Graves administration and some others, that was lowered to current 20 mills. As that aid went down, and then you hit the recession in 2008, school districts began to use the LOB for operations, and that was the equalization part of the conversation in the Gannon case that came down last year, is because Johnson County with an LOB can get a lot more money than a community in western Kansas with the same mill levy, right? A mill in Johnson County raises a lot more because there's a lot more property value there than, say, in western Kansas, and I think I don't remember, southeast Kansas is one of the cities that Dale Dennis always uses, and I can't remember which one it is now, Galena or something.
Yeah,
Baxter
Galena.
Springs. Yeah, he always has the big one and the little one. He says, this is the disparity, right? And it's true. One mill here raises tens of thousands, and one here raises a couple $1,000s. So as those LOBs became used for operations instead of extras, it became an inequitable situation. And so that's all part of the conversation that needs to be had. And you're right, the block grants don't specify how we're going to deal with LOBs, and so that's very important because they've become an increasing part of the operations of school districts instead of just for the wants instead of the needs.
The headline, I should say, Scott Miller from KOFO Radio. The headline this morning in the Kansas City Star says something to the effect of Brownback's trip to Fantasyland is not good for Kansas. My question to both of you is, do you have similar feelings like that? And if so, how does this legislature avoid what's happening in Washington where lawmakers are constantly at odds with the president?
Well, I didn't read the article, so I don't know what they're referring to on the fantasy, but, you know, there's nobody that you agree with 100%. I mean, I joke about it. I don't even agree with my husband, who's in the back of the room, and I couldn't do this without him. He stepped out since
walked
I
out,
mentioned
yeah.
his name. But, you know, we don't even agree 100% of the time, but we have the conversation, we have the discussion, and we come up to the best solution, and that's what we need to do in the state also. You know, the governor has proposed some stuff, the block grant, for example. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I don't know what the feel of the legislature is for the tax increases on cigarettes and alcohol. However, I do not support that. You know, I don't think that's what we need to be doing as a state. We need to be digging in and finding out where those inefficiencies are. One of the items that came up in committee this week, we had some testimony. There was a summer interim committee of just individuals throughout the state, some superintendents, different business people that were to study the school system and see how we could improve it in Kansas. And it was a short amount of time, but they did come up with some proposals. But one of the proposals that I thought was interesting was there is a state statute that it's a goal to get 65% of the funding to the classroom and to the teachers. And it's a goal, it's not even a mandate. Well, that study committee, 5 of the members voted to remove that goal completely. And 4 of them voted that they wanted it mandated, not just a goal. So I think that's something that we need to look at and make sure that the funding is getting to the classroom and we are spending the money where it needs to be spent.
Scott, you know, the Kansas City Star is not known as a favorable newspaper to the governor, so I wouldn't be surprised to see a headline like that. And after, you know, a couple of stints in public service, I can tell you sometimes the headline doesn't always match the story. But I think and again, I haven't seen this article. I don't know what the sum total of the article really is all about. But I can tell you that from my perspective as a legislator and having been there and having kind of watched this progression since 2012 on the zero income tax, the notion was that we would cut taxes and we would see economic prosperity. And I don't think that anyone at the State House says, yeah, that's exactly what's happened. We've gotten enough job growth and enough people have moved to Kansas that we've not seen any negative impact to the state budget because of these tax cuts. And I think that what the governor has proposed, as I understand it, is about an $800 million increase in revenues and transfers from different sources. And what you really have is about $600 million in transfers and tax increases, and about $100 million or so in spending cuts out of a $6 billion budget. That's billion with a B, $100 million in spending cuts. So, this notion of we're going to make government smaller and more efficient is not happening. We both talked about that in our opening comments. And what we're doing is essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul at this point in terms of taking money from KDOT, and the Secretary has finally come out and said this will begin to jeopardize construction projects around the state. There are projects that have been delayed that now may not happen. And so that does have an impact. And we need to be mindful of that. There's also something else that's not being talked about a lot, and that's the $1.5 billion in bonding that the governor is talking about doing regarding CAPERS. We had a plan to make CAPERS more solvent, and the governor's allocations in December pulled $40 million out of that. It's like paying off a mortgage. Every dollar you pay today will save you 2 or 3 down the road because you're paying off early and saving interest. Same with the pension fund. More dollars we can get into the pension fund now and make it more solvent, the less damage we have later on. So bonding $1.5 billion is a significant amount of money, and it's something we need to really talk about, because we're pushing that debt service off. And folks, the debt service on that $1.5 billion is finally paid off in 2043. 2043. Our children and our grandchildren will be paying the freight for that debt. And so we all have some hard questions we need to ask. You know, for our pension system, would we rather pay taxes today, or would we rather push that out in terms of debt payments with interest to future generations? I don't have the answer to that, but it's something we as citizens need to be mindful of and be talking about. And we have to avoid cliche, because it becomes very easy to say, oh, we're a zero tax state, and less taxes means more prosperity, and not really dig into the meat of what goes on economically. And I've said it before, and I say it again, I encourage you to look past the simple 30-second talking point answer and get into the weeds and talk about the specifics of how these things will be accomplished, because there are some things in this proposal, and that's all it is at this point, a proposal, it's not become law, that could be very, very harmful to our economy going forward and to our young people and future generations in Kansas. So we need to be mindful of all of those things. Don't know what the article's about. Those are my thoughts on what was promised, what we're seeing, and how that might play out in the future. I think that the senator's right. You know, we have what they call the formulaic rate cuts. So you all know what we're talking about. Those are the set rate cuts. We went from 6 to 5.4 to 4.9 and on down. And right now I think it's at 4.7.
That's the high bracket.
The high bracket, and the low bracket's 2.7.
2.2.
It's supposed to go down to 2.6, and they reduced it in the governor's plan to 2.66. So there's a 0.04% tax rate reduction for the lower tax bracket for a family making about $30,000. I think they estimate that's 55 cents a month. Probably not the kind of thing that's going to create jobs and bring people to Kansas. So we need to have a broader conversation about how our tax policy can be structured to be the most fair and the most incentivizing to bring people here.
Okay, we got a question. We have a question back here. Before we do that, I know there's a number of people standing here in the back. I think I counted about 7 empty seats. So if you want to sit as opposed to standing, why don't you raise your hand if there's an empty seat near you?
We got a few up here if anybody else wants to answer questions.
Okay. We'll take our next question back here.
I'm Louise Deeds, and I'm going to talk about something other than education, because I think one of the dumbest proposals is changing the Constitution to allow election of judges, because the political process has been so distorted by big money, and it would be a grave mistake to change the Constitution to elect judges. And this is something else, but I'm going to throw it in. Changing our elections to have city and school board elections at the same time as the August primary is also a very foolish suggestion. Thank you.
It's my turn to go first.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I get you want us to respond to that, I assume, Louise, or you just.
And I'm proud of you too.
Thank you.
That's 2, Richard.
That's 2. My dad's here, and we're still sitting at 2. Hopefully, we can break the 3 barrier here soon. Judicial selection is one of those issues that's been around the State House for about 8 to 10 years, and it's proof that no idea ever truly dies in the legislature. It just comes back another year. And it got out of committee a couple years ago and set below the line, meaning we never voted on it in the House for the Supreme Court, the constitutional change. They did change the selection method for the Court of Appeals, and some of you may have tracked that and followed along with how that went. And I won't get into the vagaries of why they can change the Court of Appeals and not the Supreme Court. The proposal that the governor mentioned in the state of the state to have judges elected is the first time I've ever heard someone other than a legislator from Wichita talk about that being a viable option. They have elected judges down there. I believe they also have the highest rate of turnover on their bench in any judicial district in the state. And I will say this, I will die in that ditch. I will never vote for the direct election of Kansas appellate judges. It is being in politics and seeing the amount of money that gets thrown around, and many of you who live in this district saw the amount of money that outside groups threw into candidacies last summer. There is a corrupting influence of money in politics, and if we're going to extend that to our judiciary, I will never vote for that. I simply don't believe that's right. We can talk about whether we should use the federal model that the governor and some of his friends favor, which is to have him appoint and the Senate confirm, or whether the merit selection process that we have now could be changed, and there's a wide-ranging debate on that. I suspect we're going to have hearings on that in the Judiciary Committee next week. I suspect the change to the federal model that we use for the appellate court, that the Court of Appeals, gets out of committee and probably sits below the line at this point. It probably does not pass and go on to be voted on a constitutional amendment. There are concerns about another bill, and this one hasn't gotten the press. There's another bill that was submitted by the Vice Chairman of the Judiciary Committee that mandates that Court of Appeals and Supreme Court justices retire at age 65. It's currently 70, and that district court judges retire at 70 instead of what is now 75. The practical effect of that would be that before the governor's second term is over, if both of these measures passed, he would appoint significant numbers of new Supreme Court justices. Now, it was distasteful back in the 1930s when President Roosevelt wanted to pack the Supreme Court with his folks, and I find it equally distasteful that any governor would be set up to appoint a majority of the Supreme Court justices. I don't care what party you're from, and understand this can work the other way. We've had Democratic governors in Kansas several times, and it can work the other way. And I just don't like the political influence on the judiciary. I would much rather see us try to go about some other way, and the governor has the final deciding vote on judicial selection at this point. No judge serves on any panel in this state without being appointed by the governor. It's a question of who brings the nominees to him or her for the governor's decision. So that's kind of the lay of the land on judicial selection at this point. I don't think directly electing appellate judges is going to get any traction. Wichita has a voting block, but I don't think there's enough of them to get direct election of appellate judges. So I think that was probably just thrown out as an applause line for the folks from South Central Kansas.
You know, it's interesting being an elected official. There is a lot of money with elections and campaigns, a lot of lobbyists in Topeka. In fact, you know, we run on issues and we campaign and we tell how we're going to vote when we get up there. And so many legislators will go up there and vote a different way than they actually campaigned. I was named the #1 senator for economic freedom, for freedom fighter in the Senate. And I told you I would fight for our freedoms and work for our legislation that supports that. So I'm proud of that, and I'm proud that I can go to Topeka, and when the lobbyist from the grocery store hands me the check, I tell them straight out, you know I'm not with you on your issue. And they said, yes, we know, but you will listen to us. I absolutely will listen. That's my job, to listen to my constituents and to find out what's going on in the district. But that being said, you know, so I'm hoping that I don't think we'll go to an election of judges, but hopefully we will have people that are strong enough to not cave to that system. That's definitely what we need. But what has been proposed and what has passed the Senate before is not an election of judges, but an appointment of judges. The governor appoints, and then the Senate votes to confirm or not. A similar example is Representative Bill Fiburn was recently appointed to a position by the governor, and the Senate will be voting on it in the next couple weeks. My feeling is that he will be unanimously voted in for that position, but that is one of the proposed items that has passed the Senate before, and I could see something like that possibly happening. But if it did, it would be a constitutional change for the Supreme Court. And I'm just not sure that we have the votes in both chambers to make a constitutional amendment for that. So,
One other, Ms. Dietz asked about moving elections and where we
Yeah.
stood on that. I'm not in favor of moving municipal elections. I've served as a city commissioner in the city of Ottawa and know many people who've served in those roles. What will happen if those are moved in the even-numbered years to match up with state-level races? A couple of things. One, we will create an incredible burden on our election officers across the state who will now be creating ballots, and we have many poll workers here who understand what I'm talking about. You will have different ballots for each city precinct, and then you've got all of these races, and so you'll have multiple ballots that have to be printed, and that will take time and expense. We will also be muddying the waters in terms of these races versus state races. I think the tendency will be in the move is to try to make them partisan. I know that's the Secretary of State's proposal. We don't need partisanship in these local elections. I've served on these boards. You know what somebody's party affiliation is as you talk to them. You know what their position is. But what's most important is how you work together to do business of the city or the school district and take care of its patrons. And you don't need another factor dividing people, which is what partisanship at that local level will do. And those issues, those local issues, are going to get lost, folks. I mean, you know, we all went through the campaigns last year, and we saw all of the. I mean, you couldn't turn on your TV and watch anything without an ad, right? You couldn't go to your mailbox without getting mailers. How are you really going to weigh and decide on local elections with all of that buzz going on? There are places in the state where airtime was completely bought out. If a local candidate had wanted to get airtime to spread his or her message, they couldn't have done it. And there's a reason we've kept those two things apart in our state and recognize that there's a difference in the hurly-burly and the partisan bickering that goes on in Topeka and Washington, D.C. versus what goes on at the local level and the need for that to be what it is now. And so I don't want to see that happen. And the Secretary of State proposed straight party ticket voting at polling places. You can go in and just say, I'm going to vote Democrat and vote all the way down the line, or Republican and vote all the way down the line. You don't even have to think about it at that point. I mean, the reason we got away from that as an electoral reform is so that people could think about different offices and consider their choices. And we should not encourage people to short-circuit that decision-making process. And we should certainly not create a situation where you're going in and looking at a 2, 3, or 4-page ballot to vote for all of these offices at one time. We know what happens. Everybody, if you have to flip your ballot over, let's be honest with ourselves. If you flip your ballot over, a lot of times either it doesn't get flipped over or somebody flips it over and just starts filling in circles. I didn't know how to vote on that, so I just voted no. Okay, well, maybe it was something like the charity raffles for churches that we talked about last that had benefit, and people should have looked at it. So we want to make sure people are taking their time and carefully considering everything on the ballot. I think we need to leave it where it's at.
You know, we've talked about this. I think the first, one of the first coffees that was hosted, that question came up. Actually, it's come up every year since we've been here. I have not heard an argument strong enough to move it to even year elections. One thing that I would consider, and I've heard a little bit of rumbling that may happen, is that it would go to odd year November elections. That way, every voter in Kansas knows that every November they have an election. And it would be very simple. Instead of, you know, the April, some people get confused, that type of thing. So if they're wanting to help voter turnout, I think knowing every year that you have a November election, that would help. So that is something that we could consider.
We'll get to you, Amelia.
Yeah.
My name is Stan Wiles. I'm from Ottawa, Kansas, and my issue is Medicaid expansion. I think it's critical for the state of Kansas to pass Medicaid expansion this year. 2014 was the first year that Medicaid expansion came up, and Kansas didn't get it, and we lost $344 million. In 2015, if we don't get it, we'll lose $381 million. If we don't get it by 2016, the state of Kansas will lose $2.2 billion. And I think the reason why we need Medicaid expansion is twofold. Number one is taxes. The $344 million that Kansas should have gotten now goes to Ohio, Colorado, California, those kind of states that do it. And I think we need so our tax dollars from Kansas, millions of dollars, $344 million, that goes to those states, and we don't get it. And the second reason is I think that with Medicaid expansion, hospitals would be able to make ends meet. I went to Mr. Moyer Bunting, who's an official at Ransom Hospital. He told me that Ransom Hospital, about 12% of the people that come in there can't pay their bill. And so what do? He says that there's about $800,000 that Ransom Hospital doesn't get because people come in and can't pay the bill. So what do? Well, he told me that the first people making less than $18,000, they don't even try to collect that. It's gone. If they got an $8,000 procedure, they just knock it off. For those that are making over $18,000, they collect about 16 cents on the dollar. So out of the $800,000, about $670,000 they can't collect. They collect about $130,000. Now what do? Does Ransom just knock that off? No, they got to pay doctors and hospitals and nurses and that kind of thing. So what they do is they put it on the bills of other people. They increase their dues, so they get $670,000. So just a second. Well, so they put it on your and my bill. So it doesn't come to me because I'm over 65 years of age. But the people in this room that are under 65 that have insurance, that they put that bill on they increase their bill so they can pick up that $670,000. And you say, well, I got insurance. Yeah. Well, if that's the case, if the insurance company's got to pay that $670,000, then they boost your rates up. So anybody under 65 that has insurance has got to rates go up. And so I'm hoping I can persuade the two of you legislators to get behind and let's get Kansas past Medicaid expansion this year.
Can I follow up on that one?
Want to respond?
What's interesting about that is the federal government has a tendency to entice us to do things that we may not have done with money. And it's interesting because that money is out there and it was only a 3-year funding. And then they're going to decrease it substantially and it's going to come back on the states. Well, we've already got a stopgap with the state that we need to address. And if we're looking at that kind of expansion with Medicaid, we have to tread cautiously with it. One of the items that I've heard is that we could use the funding, not the Medicaid expansion, but the other funding that we need to address the waiting lists that we have before us, before we even look at changing the program to that degree. But I do. There's two things that have gone on with our health care in Kansas that have impacted us greatly. Obamacare was one of them. And some of the details are starting to come out on this, and it's worse than some of us actually thought. One of the items that has come forward this year is that as a state of Kansas, because of our income level and a couple of other things in the equation, we are going to have to pay in $20 million to the federal government as a tax as a result of Obamacare. And then we were told yesterday that there's another $23 million on top of that as a result of Obamacare. And so that's $43 million that we've got to come up with this year as a state just to pay our taxes to our federal government for health care. And we have one of the medical systems in Kansas that we have, and I forget the name of it, but we pay approximately $7 million, and it is one of the most efficient systems, the clinical health programs that we have to help get medicine and health support to individuals that need it. instead of being able to prop up that system, we're going to have to pay taxes to the federal government. So it's not an easy answer, an easy solution. We've got to look at all the numbers and where it's going to put us. One of the items that happened with the stimulus package, we all remember that a few years ago, how it was going to save everything. It was billions of dollars. And the schools got an influx of money for 1 year from the federal government. And the state did not match that money the next year. They did not increase the resources to match the federal funds that were lost. And for the next year, we've heard for years now that the state cut education funding. Well, since 2012 to 2015, education funding from Kansas has gone up $312 million, state funding. So that's not a cut. The cut was from the federal money. So we just got to be very cautious how we tread with this and look at all the numbers and how it's going to impact us, not just in the short run, but in the long run. And we do need to support our rural hospitals. We absolutely need health care. You know, I've got family members, they have to drive 60 miles to get to a doctor. You know, that one of the bills that we are going to see this year, and I'm hoping that we can get it out of committee and get it to the floor to debate, is, and the doctors probably aren't going to appreciate it, currently in Kansas, nurse practitioners have to have a doctor that they report to oversee, and they pay them a fee. So the bill, what that would do is remove that requirement in Kansas and allow nurse practitioners to hang out their own shingle. So that's going to be one of the items that's up for debate this year to try and improve our medical services in the state of Kansas.
You mean the state of Kansas shouldn't accept $381 million?
We've got, let them respond to the question. So then you have a response to that.
Yeah, I can tell you that, and I've been consistent in my position on this, the decision to expand Medicaid has traditionally been the governor's decision, Stan, and he has not made that decision yet. The legislature stepped in last year and added another layer of bureaucracy on top of that and said, oh, we got to vote on it after you make your decision, Governor. Government efficiency in action. This year there is a plan from the Kansas Hospitals Association, KHA, to expand Medicaid without using state general fund dollars for the 10% match. And I've not delved into the plan yet. I understand it may get some hearings in some of our legislative committees, and that would be an exciting opportunity, I think, to try to get the benefits of Medicaid expansion for our rural hospitals, like Ransom, and help pay down some of that $800,000 that you're talking about in services provided but unpaid for, while not having a negative impact on the state general fund. So I'm excited to take a look at that. I'm happy that the legislature is not just blocking expansion, but actually talking about, is there a way to develop a Kansas solution to this problem? And I'm excited that for the first time in a few years we might actually have some legislative hearings and dig into those proposals to see if they really have merit. So.
I've got a letter. Mr. Bunning gave me a letter from the Kansas Hospital Association. If you want, I'll be glad to give you a copy of it.
I will take a look at it after this meeting.
Sure.
Okay? But it wouldn't be in one of my committees, but I understand there are some committees looking at hearing on that KHA proposal. So I think that's a good thing and something we should be talking about. I would also note one other thing. Expanding Medicaid in Kansas means expanding CanCare. And the Senator and I have both been critics of CanCare. Also buried in the governor's budget of interest to everyone here is that it raises the privilege tax on the MCOs, the managed care organizations that oversee CanCare. They will pay more money to the state of Kansas for the privilege of administering CanCare. Keep in mind that what we've heard is that they're all underwater. They're not making money now, so now we're going to tax them more. So they can make even less. So keep your eyes on CanCare. There may be some significant issues there as we go forward.
That's the expansion of CanCare, the same thing as accepting.
Okay, let's move ahead. You've talked a while. Let's give others a chance. We got about 10 more minutes, I believe. And remember, I said let's be brief on the questions. We want to allow as many folks to ask questions as they can. So brief and to the point. Brief to the point.
Senator, you mentioned the possibility of having the municipal elections in the odd years, but still in the summer and fall slots, but like August and November. But where does that strike with like school budgets and so forth?
there would be an adjustment during the initial election. You know, the legislature is the one that establishes the funding. We're on a 2-year budget path now, so I don't see why that would be that large of impact if the local schools know that their funding's for 2 years, that they can't also possibly go into a 2-year funding. You know, that's something that the locals would have to decide, but yeah, I don't see it as a big issue. I haven't heard a major negative on going from from April to November. I have heard a lot of feedback on going to an even year, and so I've listened to my constituents on that. I agree with them. It would create too much difficulty and too much hardship. And it's not about partisan for me. I work with both parties up there. In fact, one of my good friends is a Democrat. We don't agree on the issues all the time, but we are very meticulous at looking at the bills and pointing out items to each other and working together to get the best solution. And so that's what we're trying to do here, is find the best solution for all Kansans, and especially the 12th district. I'm a little biased there.
Hi, I'm Jarrett Owens, and I live in Ottawa. Blaine, I am proud of you too, buddy. So,
Agree.
my question for you guys was to ask if the state has any plans to help fund the rail trail system to connect them from border to border, both north and south and east and west, and are there any funds available for our city government to help improve what we have here?
I don't know of any plan currently to do that. I know the governor has expressed an interest at some point in connecting up the Horseman's Trail that runs east and west through Franklin County, and possibly trying to connect it at some point with the Katy Trail in Missouri to create a very long trails network running east and west. I know that some cities and counties use special alcohol money for parks and recreation. And so theoretically an increase in alcohol tax, if any of that's passed through, but I don't think any of that's proposed to be passed through. So I don't see any additional money at this point in the budget, and given the fiscal constraints we have, I would be surprised if the state was going to increase spending on the trail network at this point. So I don't know for certain, but that's just my best guess based on what we know now.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Thanks, Richard. I'm Diane Drake. I'm a trustee of Ransom Memorial Hospital, and I also support the Kansas Association hospital plan. It will also assist community mental health centers, and I represent Elizabeth Layton Center. I appreciated your comments on CanCare. We do have, outside of Kansas, companies that are private for-profit corporations managing the care of citizens who have many medical problems, including mental illness. One of the things you need to know is in that budget cut, the CanCare companies pursued restricting mental health drugs. That's one of the budget cuts that we're looking at. And when you came to our legislative dinner, you were very aware of the issues at the state hospital. Restricting mental health cuts will have a direct effect on what we can do to keep people in our communities where they have loved ones. So I'd like your response to that proposed cut.
Yeah, I've been very strong on CanCare, as you guys have heard. I think that's not the way that we should have gone. What I do appreciate about that system is that the people that are a part of it are trying to make it work as much as possible, but we've got some major difficulties with it. As far as the mental health issue, I'm happy to say that all of the legislators from Miami County, Representative Jones, the majority leader from the House, myself, the new Senator, Molly Baumgardner, met with the officials from KDADS who manage the hospital over in Osawatomie, and we addressed our issues, mental health issues, not just mental health, but alcohol and drug, and when the sheriff, it's an issue for the community. It's not just an issue for the hospitals or the mental health services. And so one of the items that did come out of that, and I'll make sure that you guys are aware of the meeting when we do have it, we're planning on an open meeting in April in Osawatomie so that we bring down the officials from the Osawatomie State Hospital from the state so that they can hear from the communities directly, and they know that they have their legislative support on that. So I think that's very important that we do have that open communication, and they're strongly aware. We presented to them how important the issue is, not just to the Miami County community, but to the Franklin County and the other communities in our area. So
I think it's a formulary proposal that you're talking about, which could require those who have mental health issues and are on medications to suddenly change medications and go to something different or something cheaper for the MCOs. And this is one of the perils of cost containment, and I've always had an issue with CanCare that we say, well, we spend too much on healthcare, so let's slap a layer of corporate bureaucracy on top of it, and surely we'll pay less. And that's just really not the way things tend to work, but that's what we've got. I oppose that sort of change. I mean, Diane, I've worked in the legal field and represented people who were on involuntary commits to Osawatomie State Hospital. It's often difficult to get folks in that position to take their medication at all, let alone to deal with changing medication suddenly and the side effects that go with it. It's not like your high blood pressure medicine or an antibiotic that you take. You can't just stop taking those drugs. They have to be either weaned off and then raised up to new levels on the new drug. And so these kinds of changes are problematic for providers within the mental health community. And it gets at the broader problem we're focused on with cost containment. It goes all the way full circle to the initial conversation that we as Kansans have to decide what our priorities are and what are we willing to spend on, because we will spend on mental health one way or the other. We had a presentation from Ray Roberts, Secretary of Corrections, in our Corrections Committee this week, and the next day was Sean Sullivan, Director of the Kansas Sentencing Commission. Over 70% of inmates in Kansas have a substance abuse or mental health problem, oftentimes undiagnosed or untreated. Roughly a third of those inmates have mental health issues that they are dealing with. And we have, when we deinstitutionalized that population back in the 80s and said, okay, we're going to try to treat you in the community, if we don't properly fund the community support network, they end up in jail because they engage in behaviors that violate state law. And we end up paying for them there to the tune of their incarceration at $25,000 plus. Keep in mind that 98% of the inmates in the Kansas prison population will be released at some point. So they're coming back into our communities. And if we don't address this and we don't provide the proper community supports, it is a public safety issue for all of us, including those folks who are suffering and can't get the help that they need, who might be a harm to themselves or to others. It's not that there's a higher incidence of violence with the mentally ill, but it's that we're not treating the root cause of the problem, and so we're paying double later on instead of being wise stewards of the public weal and taking care of those problems up front. And so those are the kinds of things that we need to be talking about, and I don't think this formulary change is going to be beneficial.
Okay, one last short question.
It is short. My name's Judy Davis Cole. I live in Ottawa, and there is a very small, little-known bill up there pending called the Caregiver Bill, and it specifically targets hospitals and mandates improvements in patient and caregiver education. It supports those caregivers in Kansas, 605,000 unpaid caregivers in Kansas, through education and training. Doesn't cost the state a cent, but it does make some mandates on training and education of caregivers. Have you heard of the bill? Are you aware of it? And what is your stance on it?
Yes, I am aware of the bill. You guys are a very effective lobbying group. You didn't waste any time. I haven't had a chance to read it thoroughly, but I have heard your thoughts on the bill. And as always, I'll do my research and due diligence and try to figure out what's best for this area. I definitely want to hear from the hospitals too on their opinion and get both sides of the issue so that we have an informed decision when we go forward. I do know the representative that is sponsoring the bill, and that kind of brings a little bit of credibility to it because she does tend to tread cautiously when she proposes legislation. So and those of you that aren't aware of the bill, it would name a caregiver, if I understood properly. When you're in the hospital, one person would be named as your caregiver, and that person would be allowed access to all of your medical information. They would receive the phone call when you were released from the hospital, what your medicines were, any restrictions that you had, and that person would basically be responsible for your care as a volunteer.
I've heard of the bill, Judy. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. From what I've heard, it sounds like it would be a good thing. Certainly want to take a look at it before I pledge support one way or the other, but appreciate the work that you and those other 605,000 caregivers provide to folks across the state. It's a perfect example of what Kansas is about. We help each other out, and we support each other and our neighbors, and so thank you for that, and look forward to getting deeper into that one as we go forward in the session.
Representative Finch, your dad said there's 4 people that are proud of you. So I guess that's not,
And I got a text.
got 5?
I got a text message from my mom. She's over at 911 dispatch watching on the Government Access Channel. Hi, Mom. And
The list is growing, I guess.
she's still waffling, but I think we
Still
may have
waffling,
fun.
okay. If you didn't get your questions asked, the next legislative coffee will be February 7th, I believe. January 31st, out at the airport, will be the chamber dinner, annual dinner. I believe tickets are $35. So you want to be insured to attend that. February 11th, we will be taking a busload to Topeka to have an opportunity to tour the Capitol and possibly your Representative Finch, Senator Tyson, speak to us. I want to thank everybody for their for attendance. We had a big crowd this morning, larger than we thought, larger than usual, but that's good. And then finally, we want to thank Senator Tyson and Representative Finch for being with us this morning.
Thank you all.
Thank you.